Welcome to the Tao of Pizza, where we feature top logistics leaders, entrepreneurs, and supply chain innovators and share their inspiring stories with a holistic twist.
Mark Hiddleson here, host of the Tao of Pizza podcast, where I talk with top industry innovators in the warehousing, logistics, and supply chain business with a holistic twist. And before I introduce today's guest, Bonnie Artman Fox, this episode is brought to you by Specialized Storage Solutions. And I think everybody knows by now that I've been in the logistics and storage industry for several decades, and I know I don't look that old, but it's definitely true. We provide industry-leading warehouse solutions, storage solutions nationwide. So basically, if you have a warehouse that needs racks, shelving, carts, conveyors, or mezzanines, we help with the design, engineering, installation, inspections, and repairs to help our clients optimize their logistics operations. And Bonnie, it's funny, sometimes people don't even realize that we can actually help with permit acquisition services as well. So we take a holistic look at your entire business supply chain to develop the resources for continually improving your operation. To learn more, visit us at specialracks.com. Give us a call at 707-732-3892. Or I always give my personal email out to podcast listeners. Send me an email at markhiddleson@aol.com if you're ready to take your warehouse, storage, and retrieval systems to the next level. Now, today's guest is a best-selling author, workplace conflict expert, and accredited boss whisperer. Bonnie Artman Fox equips executive leaders with powerful communication tools that bring teams together. Drawing from decades of experience as a psychiatric nurse and licensed family therapist, her leadership turnaround coaching program has an 82% success rate of coaching leaders to replace abrasive behavior with emotional intelligence skills. Bonnie's book, How Did My Family Get Into My Office, provides a unique perspective on how family upbringing impacts how we handle conflict as leaders. Bonnie, welcome to the Tao of Pizza.
Hello, and thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I have to mention we were introduced by Vicky Delajoyo, and she is just an amazing, she shares her brand of brilliance through her amazing way of joy system for generating joy as a fuel, not a goal. So I want to encourage, and I just hosted Vicky I've hosted her twice on the podcast, but check out her website at vickydelajoyo.com. I am so glad that Vicky made the introduction. And how do you know Vicky?
Vicky and I have been in a mastermind group together, and I just listened to her and the comments that she made. I was drawn to want to know her more. And as a result of being in the group together, I have also enlisted her for help with coaching also myself. So yes, I'm a big fan of Vicky.
Yeah, I was lucky. 20 years ago in my master's program, she led, and I did two of them, but they were weekend retreats where it was basically, 9 a.m. till 9 p.m, 3 days in a row, intensive training with other people. And just, I kept her work. I practiced the things I learned from Vicky. I'm never going to let this practice go.
Yes.
It is that cool.
Yes.
Yeah. So I love your, reading your the introduction, the 82% effect. I didn't want to just jump right in, but I think most, I don't know, efficacy. I'm kind of passionate. I'm not a psychologist, but I look at efficacy rates and I'm always thinking it's like 20% or something. And so I see 82, that's like the opposite. So I'd like to share, how did you how is that, first of all, or how do you, that blows me away.
Yes. Well, I give credit to Laura Crawshaw, who is the founder of the Boss Whispering Institute. And she developed the Boss Whispering coaching method and that's the method that I follow in coaching leaders to replace abrasive behavior with emotional intelligence skills. And a key foundation to that program, helping the actual abrasive leader to transform their behavior, is first of all working with the manager of the abrasive leader. Because just like in a family, what behaviors are modeled and tolerated are the behaviors that we see in children. What we see in parents is what we see in children. In the same way, what managers model and tolerate is what defines the work culture. A big part of the boss whispering method being successful is the manager to have their own backbone and confidence and be courageous to have that conversation with the abrasive leader that in essence says, we care about you, we appreciate you, and the value that you bring to our organization. How you treat people isn't okay. And we want to offer you help to turn around these behaviors. And that's the beginning, is the manager intervening with the abrasive leader and saying, we want to help you. We want to keep you here.
Yeah, and it's a great because it's from a coaching perspective, right? I mean, you're taking and you're starting a level above. That's one. So I've owned my own company for it'll be 20 years or it was 20 years in April.
Congratulations.
And so I've always over the years hired coaches and kind of for that reason, because it's and it does, it is nice to have the upper level because how do you get training, coaching? And so now I've engaged coaches like Vicky and you, and I think it's part of the holistic twist. And that's one of the things. So I've hosted my top clients, I've hosted partners that we work with in the warehouse equipment and everything like that. But a big part of what we do, it's relationships. And I was thinking, well, when Vicky introduced us and we were talking about the abrasive leader, I go, maybe Vicky, she probably is, I'm one of those abrasive. And our business is all family. I mean, my wife and I have been partners the whole time in business. And now in the last few years, my oldest son works for us. All of our kids have been in the business. And so there are those patterns of connecting. And one of the things that's big, and I wanted to talk to you about, is sometimes there's tough conversations. Like you need to, and those are the ones you really need to have, because when you have it, the relationships get better. So, what are some of the things you work with on, how self-awareness and conflict was handled in the family? How does that transfer to having those tough conversations?
Well, let me give you, I'll start out by giving a statistic about self-awareness. And this comes from Tasha Urich. And I'll ask you the question of what is the percentage of people that you think are self-aware? People that would say, I'm self-aware. What number would you estimate the percentage of people who would say they're self-aware?
It's a tough question for me. And there's so much of a spectrum of self-awareness. Uh, I mean, my guess would be they would say they're self-aware.
Yes, and have the awareness of how they come across, of the impact of their words and actions, what triggers them.
Yeah, I'd say half the people probably think they know. Like I
Mhm,
know, oh, that triggers me. That's my trigger. Yeah, and that's a
mhm,
level. I'd say
mhm,
half people would say, and the other half would be, "What are you talking about?"
mhm.
That's my guess.
Okay. Well, according to Tasha Urich, her statistic is that 95% of people think they're self-aware.
Wow.
According to her research, then, the actual number of people who are self-aware are between 10 to 15%. So that means the majority of us are not self-aware.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I've been doing self-awareness work for at least 20 years. I would say it really started before that because my passion even, started as a young athlete to kind of know pattern,
Mhm,
because you can get into like a hitter in baseball can get into a slump, or I was a pitcher. And if you start to think you get nervous and everything, then you suck.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so
mhm,
work that those levels of self-awareness to go, wait a minute, I'm getting carried away, go back to, breathing or, lifting
mhm,
weights or whatever.
mhm,
But there's levels, like even now I'm in blind spots. I know I went to, every time I go to this train, it's like, wow, I didn't realize I come across. And that's why I wouldn't say I'm abrasive because I do have emotional intelligence, but
right. Yes.
I have this mentality. I'm an athlete. I have this thing that I like to be. Everybody should play every down like it's 4th and 2. Like in football, that's like your last
Mhm,
chance and everything.
mhm,
But
mhm,
then I realized, like, well, it'd be better to play life like it's 2nd and 3. because you know you're going to get another chance. You only need 3 yards. And really, so that to me, that's like a level of self awareness. Like, wow, I've played my whole life like it's 4th and 2, and it's not really ever 4th and 2.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, going
So,
back to abrasive leaders, and you're right. If you have some the awareness, or even asking if you're abrasive, you're not abrasive. Truly abrasive leaders genuinely have blinders on, that they genuinely don't realize how they come across, and the condescending tone, the overreacting, going from 0 to 10 in a matter of seconds, yelling at employees, colleagues in front of others, in the hallway, on the Zoom room, in a staff meeting, calling people names, even, that they're genuinely driven by the perception of appearing inadequate and incompetent. And their focus is on getting things done. And anyone or anything that gets in their way of getting things done is what triggers that abrasive reaction. Now, just a caveat here, a distinction: bullies, on the other hand, know what they're doing. They are aware. The impact of a bully and an abrasive leader can be the same in terms of the negativity and the condescension of how they come across, but the intent is very different with an abrasive leader. And that's why abrasive leaders are coachable. They genuinely don't realize how they're coming across. And in the Boss Whispering program, that's what we help them to gain self-awareness of how others perceive them, that they genuinely don't realize. And oftentimes, as we begin the coaching process, and they're giving me permission to interview their colleagues to understand the perceptions of how they come across, and I give them a feedback summary, they say, "This isn't who I want to be. I had no idea." And there is a genuine remorse and an earnestness to turn things around. And I just recently wrapped up working with a reformed or transformed abrasive leader. And he said at the end, he said, "I am so grateful, not only for this opportunity to turn around these behaviors, my employer believed in me enough to help me and invest in me to turn these behaviors around. And now I want to repair relationships that I've damaged as a result of how I treated people that I just didn't realize." And he is on his way. And then when I circle back and interview the same people I did in the beginning to understand the negative perceptions, this is so cool. People say to me, "I'm having a totally different conversation with you than we did a few months ago. That I see a change in this person. And not only are they changing, now I'm more self aware of how I'm coming across, because I see the concerted effort that he or she is making to improve their emotional intelligence." So it's so rewarding. It's just the positive ripple effect throughout the entire organization is really, really cool to be a part of.
yeah, it's in a lot of companies, or even I was thinking when we were, since I know there's no abrasive managers in our company, we have abrasive clients sometimes. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the how do you tie uh and I have one of my holistic approaches is I look at things as a systems, like a systems based thinking, and I like a family is a living system. And
Mhm.
one of the things I've noticed, and even self awareness, some things get passed from generation to generation. It's and I call it energy, and I don't mean like woo woo, but it's a
Mhm.
pattern. It's not
Yes.
even a specific. So how do you kind of tie those things? Because I know I inherited things. It was like, where? How did this program get here? It's here. This 4th and 2 came from somewhere, and it is. So, what's an intervention, or what do you call like a strategy for working with that energy, or generational transfer?
Well, that ties into my book and How Did My Family Get in My Office, and what I call our family factor. And it's looking back at the patterns in our upbringing about how conflict was handled, and how people communicated with each other, and how upsetness was handled, and how people handle things when things didn't go as planned, or when there was a loss, or just handling feelings in general, what was modeled to us. And the premise of my book was interviewing leaders about how conflict and communication was handled in their upbringing, and how that impacted how they dealt with conflict as a leader. And in the each chapter is their story. It's broken down in the first part of each chapter is their story and their words of how conflict communication was handled in their upbringing. And as they gained self-awareness that, again, this isn't who I want to be, whether they were a conflict avoider or they were overly aggressive or a people pleaser, used humor to deal with conflict, most of them found they weren't handling it very well. So then they talk in the next part of the chapter are their productive conflict management strategies that they found meaningful for themselves. And so in answering your question, that will be different for all of us of what we do to our strategies to improve our conflict style based on what was modeled to us in our family factor. And I have an assessment for that I'm happy to share with your listeners in the show notes. But in essence, it's just a very quick assessment to understand based on your upbringing, what is your conflict style? And then after taking it, you'll get results. And then I provide strategies specific to that conflict style to help you improve how you deal with conflict in the workplace. The last part of each chapter was where I gave a description of their family factor from an emotional intelligence perspective. And I talked about what each of the leaders did well in gaining self-awareness and developing strategies to manage their reaction. And also, it's what I call to regard their scars. That, we all have stuff,
Yeah.
wounds, hurts, scars, whatever you want to call it, from our upbringing that were imprinted on us, that get imprinted in our nervous system. And looking back at our upbringing is not at all to blame, shame, or finger point. I truly believe our parents do the best they can with what they know at the time. At the same time, we're all impacted by what's modeled to us, and influences then how we choose to deal with conflict and how we communicate. In fact, we know by age 6 or 7, kids decide how they're going to handle life when things get tough. And that gets imprinted on our conflict style. And the cool thing is that as we gain awareness, we can make that conscious choice to improve our conflict style, how we communicate for the better. And that's what all of the leaders in the book did. And just give such hope and inspiration that change is definitely possible.
Nice. I'm gonna make you a promise. I didn't well, I'm gonna say I didn't have time to read your book. That's kind of an excuse. So we met a week ago. I could have ordered it. I don't order stuff off of Amazon, but I am gonna get your book. I'm gonna read it because I'm fascinated by that. I love the assessment. So what I heard, I'm gonna get back. So I asked you the intervention. You said assessment. Uh I have this space-time paradigm audit that I do that it's a really long acronym, but the A is audit, assess, and accept what is. And so I love, and in psychology, like surveys and like that, and even just taking the survey, I found
Mhm.
without doing any other intervention, you're like, whoa, you read these questions, you're like looking around, like, okay, I'm gonna tell one on myself. Well, like mine, I would be uh humor. But I had some bully aspects of things, at some point when I was 8 years old, I was like, never again, never
Mhm.
again. And in those
Mhm.
never again moments, it's like, wow, that 8 year old is still running things 40 years later. And
Yes, yes,
and
that
but the
happens.
assessment, I mean, just the assessment, and it's because it's designed by professionals, right? Like those questions, it's not a giant mystery that we're like,
Mhm.
oh, what are the keys of the tomb of
Yeah,
the thing? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so the assessment, and then what else? What did you say? But oh, just the success stories. So sharing uh,
Mhm, mhm,
success stories, and so I wanted to ask about the humor one too. And I don't want to make this about me, but I have used, uh, I try to use humor in a healthy way. Like I feel like, but it is. it can go. In our family, we have I call it, it's a cut down culture, but we heckle each other. Like our friend group as part of that. And I read this book. I can never think of the guy's first name. It was Salzman, but it was a book about work. And like we've been working in thousands and thousands of years, and the idea of a paycheck or working. But one of his things he found was like a cultural anthropology thing is that heckling is like the greatest hunters in some of the tribe, like part of the culture, like the greatest warrior, everything. They would make fun of them because
Hmm.
like, oh, look at this guy caught another big one, because it kind of kept everybody humble. And
Yes.
so humor and humble is the same,
Hmm.
root word. But
Hmm.
share what I've seen though, it has a dark side. So I also have this thing, there's a yin and a yang or a
Yes.
shadow aspect. So there's
Yes.
a shadow
Hmm.
aspects of humor.
Hmm.
So do you work with like turning that into a healthy or even like I've been blindsided too where I made a joke and you look around and it's like, ooh, that wasn't as funny as I thought it was gonna be. So how do you kind of work with that? Because I mean, I really do think humor it's a good strategy because it can keep you can say tough things without being
Yes.
hurtful and have a sense of humor. Like, look at we all, like you said, we all have this. Like we're all,
Mhm.
and I think
Yes.
those wounds are kind of the beautiful thing. When you share the wound, it's like that's what it really means to be human,
Yes.
not to be this awesome, self-aware
Right.
guy who does everything. So,
Yes.
would you say something just about humor, or the dark side and the good side, or how you kind of turned it from a success story, from a
Sure.
pathology to a success story?
Yes. It's and again, I so appreciate your vulnerability. It's such a sign of strength as your leadership, and all leaders who kind of have that air of I've got it all together, and aren't vulnerable, aren't as trusted. And so your vulnerability is definitely a competitive advantage for any leader. So thank you for modeling that for your listeners. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm embarrassed. Well, I love the people who really do listen to this. All the people on our team listen to this, and one of the things is like, oh, you got hold me accountable. I'm going to try. I don't want to say anything uh, that I don't model at work,
Mhm.
and I let them call me on it. It's like, hey, I heard you talking about the
Yes.
positive way.
Yes.
So how
Yes.
come you yelled at me yesterday?
Yeah. So getting back then to your
Yeah,
question
yeah.
about humor is, yes, humor is a way to bring levity to a tense situation and to bring just perspective so we don't take ourselves too seriously. So there's a positive to it. And at the same time, it's also for us to be aware of, is this using humor a way of avoiding talking about what needs to be talked about? And I have it here. I call that the moquita. This is a moquita,
Okay.
little elephant.
Uh-huh.
Excuse me. And it's the word moquita comes from one of the tribes in Papua New Guinea that means the truth we know about and agree not to speak of, or the elephant in the room. And we can, our different conflict styles prevent us from talking about the moquita, including humor.
Mhm.
And it's then to answer your question about how to address the moquita when humor is your go-to is looking at, and this is where self-awareness comes in. What's this about here for me? That I'm uncomfortable and I don't want to talk about the moquita. I don't want to talk about that. What is this about? And whether it's appropriate at the time in the team meeting to bring it up, or do some reflection after the meeting and then come back to the team. It's when we can have that self-awareness of what triggers us, our go-to conflict style, and again, whether that's humor, whether that's people pleasing, whether that's anger, whatever it is, avoidance, that it's for us to be aware of what is this about here, and gaining that self-awareness, and then looking at what's another way of addressing this. And maybe it's going back to the team and being vulnerable and saying, I'm aware that during that team meeting last week, I avoided talking about X, Y, and Z because I was uncomfortable about blah, 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 whatever it is. Vulnerability is a way to build trust. It's the foundation of a healthy team. And modeling that as a leader that, hey, I've got my own triggers and I'm modeling this as the leader of this team for all of us to be real. Not that a team meeting turns into a therapy session. It's just to say, I got triggered. I cracked a joke and it prevented us from talking about this deadline that we're behind on, or on our financials that we're not, our dashboard is behind, and it's uncomfortable for me to talk about that. Those are just examples
Yeah.
that it's putting it out on the table to talk about the Mokita. And first of all, it begins with, what am I avoiding? What's that about? Does that help? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was a great answer. And I was thinking of humor as a way to bring up those uncomfortable. Like for me, it's almost like I don't want to talk about this, but I'm going to make it a joke, and that's what's going to give me. So I was kind of asking you, how do you take that? And so I guess what I do is I go, okay, look, this is something I want to avoid. We all have those.
Yes.
And there was actually somebody had the false impression that I enjoyed having those tough conversations. That I heard somebody else was talking, said, yeah, Mark loves to have those conversations. It's not that I love to have those conversations. I have to have 5 conversations with myself before I have that. I just
Yes.
know it's so important
Yes.
for relationships. And
Yes.
so I don't, and then it's funny, and I try to do it in a way that I guess it looks like from the outside that I like it.
Hmm.
It's like,
Hmm.
no, I don't. I just,
No.
it's but it's interesting, but that's perception. And I love so your answer too is uh it's taking action on it. It's like
Hmm.
it's not just the self-awareness, like, oh, I'm avoiding this. Then it's like, okay, good. I wanted to avoid it. That's a win.
Right.
But
Right.
it's going taking action. There was something else. Before I ask you, well, I want to get into so we did talk about the boss whisperer, because uh, we're talking about guiding leaders to replace abrasive behaviors with emotional intelligence skills. Um, I want to ask you, how did you go from clinical psychology into this kind of work? Like, what was that journey like?
Hmm.
And it seems like you love it. I mean,
I do.
yeah, it's really rewarding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It is. Yeah. I had my own private practice in Illinois as a licensed marriage and family therapist for almost 10, 11 years. And when I moved to Pittsburgh, now it's going on 11 years ago, I made the conscious choice to shift from being a therapist to become a leadership coach. And I made that choice as I reflected on what have all of my life experiences excuse me, taught me or prepared me for at this point that I can help others. And I thought about all the people, many of the people that I saw in my private practice who came in with anxiety, sleepless nights, headaches because of dysfunctional workplaces, and bosses who were, now that I know, I didn't know the term then, abrasive, and they were suffering, and they didn't have the authority to do anything about it because they were the employee, and some of them felt stuck in the workplace. They needed the job, and as a result, were really struggling emotionally. So fast forward, then was looking at what, other than, I know that there's a lot of leadership coaches out there, but how can I, based on my experiences, how can I really make a difference? And then I found the Boss Whispering Institute, and then received the training in the Boss Whispering coaching method through Laura Crawshaw. What I didn't realize at the time also was I had an experience way back when, I'm totally aging myself, in the mid 90s. In I had been recruited for my very first leadership position. And I was upfront with them that I don't have any leadership experience. I'm not sure I'm the person for you. And they said, "Oh, Bonnie, you'll be great. You're known for your excellent clinical skills. Besides, we're going to teach you everything you need to know about being a leader, and we'll groom you in professional development." And I thought, this is great that it's in the field that I love. It was the director of an outpatient substance abuse treatment program, and I get to advance my career. Well, within a few short months, what was promised was not reality. And there were closed door meetings. There were decisions made without my input, and there was no professional development. And when I asked about it, there was silence. And being the people pleaser, my go-to conflict style is people pleasing. I was at a crossroads of what do I do? Do I stay in this job and just endure this, or do I choose to grow from this? And coaching really wasn't a thing as big as it is now. So I went to therapy. That was the only place that I could figure out how to sort through this. And what was interesting, and which leads into my book, the therapist asked me, "Tell me about how conflict was handled in your upbringing." And I thought, what does my upbringing have to do with this work situation that I'm here for? And but I answered it and said, "Well, we did things as a family. We always had dinner together. We had extended family gatherings, and we even went to Disney World." And she said, "Well, that's great. Well, how did people handle conflict?" And then it dawned on me: silence. Mm, I love my parents dearly, but we didn't know how to talk about upsetness. We didn't know how to work through differences and express upset feelings. And here I was, and this is what the therapist said: "Sounds like your family is in your office."
Oh,
Little did I know then
yeah.
those words would be the name of my book, How Did My Family Get in My Office? So that all ties together, that my passion is driven by, I've lived this of working in a dysfunctional workplace because of abrasive bosses. And I've seen it in my clients that I worked with as a therapist. And now I'm in the workplace to help leaders transform abrasive behaviors with emotional intelligence, because I know the impact it has on employees.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great a great story because it's like you solved your own I don't use I like to replace so here's my communication. I don't call them problems, I call them opportunities. You
Yes,
solved your
yes,
own opportunity
yes,
and was so huge because it was a total blind spot.
it was. It
So
was.
uh so then you just became passionate about helping other people see their blind spots and the family piece. Uh, well, then in the generations, I mean, I just think I was so impacted. I mean, I had great family, kind of the same thing, big family holidays,
Mhm.
great. So, like, if you looked at it on the outside, I even had a boss one time that said, I was going to college and work another thing, and I used to always go to my grandparents for lunch, and he would say, "Well, it's nice to come from a wealthy family," and I was like, "Our family's not wealthy." Like my grandpa is a clerk at Lumberjack, which is like Home Depot. Everything I go with, but we just eat together. We share and so
Mhm.
there was this huge side, but there was, in those they didn't have emotional intelligence classes in
No.
1952. So, my grandfather, who I really admired my grandfather, but he, same thing that, just being tough or bearing it inside or, being uh or make a joke not to talk about the important stuff. And
Yes.
it's my grandma had this, she was famous because we were going through something. I was a teenager and I feel so sorry for my mom because my mom was an angel and I was a bad teenager. Not bad. I was good. I was a great athlete, great grades and everything else, but I also like to kind of screw around. And my grandma said, "Well, all you guys need to do is just have a picnic." Just go have a picnic. And my aunt, who had studied, she was a speech pathologist and she had a lot of background in psychology and, like late 60s, early 70s, she had all this like, "Oh my God, this picnic. Like, how could you say it's a picnic? Like, picnic, picnic." But it was, there was kind of a truth in it too, that,
Mhm.
a picnic is like a change of scenery, and a
Yes.
picnic is a place, maybe we can have some of these conversations. So
Yes.
I kind of saw both sides of it. I mean, there was the
Mhm.
avoidance, and she
Mhm.
wasn't just saying all we need to do is have a
Mhm.
picnic. It was just like
Mhm.
saying a picnic is a good way.
Mhm.
Pack some tuna sandwiches and some
Of
root beer.
course.
So uh, I wanted to ask more about blind spots because, and then we were talking earlier about uh, part of so the assessment, and you kind of find out where your blind spots or where you're avoiding things, but then taking action on it. So uh, I love something that you said about it was about how our words and actions impact others, and I love the relationship between action and words because I think some people are all talk.
Mhm.
And so I was like, well, I'm taking these self-awareness classes and everything,
Mhm.
but I'm
Mhm.
still doing the same to justify being the same. So talk a little bit about the words and action and how that kind of ties in with your work.
Sure, sure. So, if I may, I'll
Yeah,
share a story from one of the leaders in the book.
I'd love
Um,
to. Yeah.
Grace, again, these are not their real names. They gave me permission to share their stories. They chose their own names. Grace grew up in a family where her mother was overly emotional, and her father was an alcoholic, but he was a very quiet drunk, in her words. Um, so when her mother would become overly emotional, and had pretty much checked out by just drinking and avoiding the mother, she didn't know what to do with that, and her mother was very overwhelming with her emotions. Grace would just check out, she would leave, and she would often go to her grandmother's house, who that was a safe place for her. So that's her upbringing, the imprint of how conflict was handled, and the way she handled it was to check out, to avoid. Uh, So fast forward then, she's in the workplace as a leader, and she finds that when her employees are overly emotional and looking to her for answers, she would start to check out. And she didn't this is where she gained self-awareness, like, "Okay, this isn't good for me as a leader. I'm supposed to still be present with my employees even though they're irritating me." And she took that step back and did the self-reflection of, "What's this about here for me?" And that's when she made the connection that, "Oh, this is what I did in my upbringing." That was her family factor of she would check out and avoid, and her family, her mother was in her office then, figuratively, metaphorically, when her employees would be overly emotional. So this is the cool part in answering your question of what did we do about it? Once we gain that self-awareness, again, we all have to answer that question that's meaningful to us. What she found would be meaningful and was very, very courageous on her part. She There was an opportunity where her mother was about to have surgery, and Grace spoke with her husband and said, "Would it be okay if mom came to stay with us while she was recovering from the surgery?" And her purpose was not only to honor her mother and to take care of her after this surgery. Grace was consciously choosing that as an opportunity for her to learn how to interact with her mother without getting caught up in the same old dance of Grace reacting and then checking out, or the two of them bantering back and forth. And she immersed herself in this opportunity to learn how to self-regulate and change her conflict pattern for the better. Not only did it improve her relationship with her mother, and it wasn't about her mother changing. This isn't about changing anybody but ourselves.
Right.
She learned how not to be reactive to her mother, and then she started showing up differently as a leader in the workplace, where it wasn't about her employees' overreaction. What was getting triggered inside of her was those old wounds, those scars, hurts from her mom not being there for her emotionally growing up, and how she made the conscious choice to heal those wounds with her mother helped her to become a more present, emotionally intelligent leader.
Wow. That's a really, really powerful story. So she had the confidence. Well, here you say she had the confidence because she had these new emotional intelligence skills. And then she had a little bit of confidence to try it because before you have the skills, you don't really want to even go there because while you're going to be in the same dance. I love that you called it a dance too,
Mhm.
because it takes two to tango.
Mhm.
uh,
Yes.
and it is a dance. But she gave the confidence, the skills, but then it's like in martial arts or something. Then you have to go in the dojo and try it out. That's
Yes.
when you
Right.
really build the skills is going into what the triggers are going to be there at a time, but
Yes.
you have some tools. That's beautiful.
And how to change the pattern. That was the name of
The
my private
pattern.
practice, was changing patterns. And this goes back to your comment earlier about generationally. These are the patterns that are passed down to us. Once we become aware of what those patterns are for us, and again, they're going to be different for all of us individually, we can make that conscious choice to change the patterns. And because this is also related to our reaction is embedded in our nervous system, it does take that conscious effort, that conscious choice to be intentional, to show up in a way of who we aspire to be, to change the pattern. And that's the cool part. We change the pattern for the next generation. And especially for you in a family owned business, you are changing the pattern
We
for your son and what the legacy you're passing on. That's so beautiful.
we have and so I've known about the pattern for a long time, and I've started learning what to do with it. What's inner, and it is energy. So the word I use is you're changing the inner. It's an energetic pattern.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it's discouraging sometimes when people talk about energy and they think like, oh, well, it's weird. But it is because there's no gap between stimulus and response. If it, in a dance like this happens like this and this, and it
Mhm,
happens so quick
mhm.
if you're not
Yes.
aware of it. Like you said, that the abrasive leaders, they're not even aware
Right.
that this is abrasive. Like this is 101. This is work 101, guys.
Right. Right.
And and the work that you're doing, it's really cool. And I think in the last 20 years, the psychotechnology, I call them psychotechnology. Like you've been in the industry for a long time, but I
Mhm,
think the technologies have really, where, maybe why therapy efficacy rates are lower than 82% is because your tools, like you have a system.
mhm.
And what was your mentor, the system? I can't remember her name. It's going to be in the show notes, but I wanted you to say it again. I can't.
Sure, Laura Crawshaw, and she
Gosh,
founded the Boss Whispering Institute.
yeah. And
I also just want to give a plug for her recent book. She just recently published this Grow Your Spine and Manage Abrasive Leadership Behavior, a guide for those who manage bosses who bully. This
yeah,
is basically a guide for the manager who is often afraid to intervene with the abrasive leader because for two primary reasons. The abrasive leader is really, really good at what they do. And so from a performance perspective, they make the company a lot of money and they have the second reason, they have expert knowledge of the industry. So the manager or the president, the owner of the company or the board doesn't want to get rid of that person because they bring in revenue or their expertise. And that's where the manager can be caught of not intervening because they're afraid of losing that person. And also, they're afraid of what to say. They don't want to make the situation worse. They're afraid the abrasive leader may turn things around on them and make them the problem, and they don't know what to say. And her book really provides an outline for that. And that's also one of the services that I provide is intervention consultation, is helping equip the manager with the confidence to intervene in order to protect the well-being and the psychological safety of the entire organization by allowing the abrasive behavior to continue.
yeah. When you were listing off the behaviors of the abrasive, I was afraid to go to work. I was like, body stop. We go to a lot of different companies. I was like, I could run into one of these guys today, one of my clients. No, it is
Yes,
scary, and
yes,
see, I'm making humor about it again, but I was seriously I was like, wow, like that would be, I would be scared. I would be scared to go to work at a place like that.
sure,
And,
sure.
just the emotional. I was like, I'm not afraid I'm going to get physically hurt. It was just like, ooh, ouch. with the
Yeah.
what you're
Right.
saying.
Right.
So I
Yes.
wanted to ask you another. Like, I love coaching. I love the coaching model. I wanted to ask you two questions about coaching. One is sometimes I read art like, what are the top 5 reasons you hire a coach? So I'd like to hear like your top reasons, like why hire a coach, but also share the difference between therapy and coaching. Because I love that distinction because I really use coaching for what you could say I would use therapy. They're not, I don't think they're interchangeable. I think it's a different model, but I would
Mhm.
love to hear because your background's awesome to answer this question.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Um, as a therapist, we tend to look more in the past and to make connections about how our patterns of how our family of origin impacts our behaviors today. And again, I always worked from a family systems perspective. So I would draw a genogram, which is basically a family tree, and go back at least 3 generations to look back at the patterns from one generation to the next. And that that was what our playbook, if you will, that in terms of understanding the generational patterns. And then the coaching is more about, okay, that impacted you, but we don't really delve into that. We focus more on the strategies going forward in order to improve and be who you aspire to be, and more about the individual answering their own questions and coming up with their own answers. And the coach, a therapist also asks a lot of really good questions. It's more so in coaching that the individual comes up with their own answers.
Nice. And what do you think are the top 2 or 3 reasons for hiring a coach?
The top one is to gain self-awareness. That again, as we've been talking about, to bring awareness to our blind spots. Most of us, as Tasha Urich's research shows, only 10 to 15% of us are really self-aware. And I've heard a quote that the best leader is the self-aware leader. So that would be the number one. And then secondly, once we're aware, then making the conscious choice to change those patterns for the better and to develop those skills that don't come natural to us, especially because of our reactivity that's embedded in our nervous system, that we have those go-to reactions, whether it's humor, whether it's people pleasing, the angry outburst. It takes a conscious effort to change those patterns and develop new strategies over time, and celebrating those incremental wins instead of looking for overnight success. Just really being intentional every day, taking one step forward, because it's only natural. We're going to go back a few steps because these are patterns that have been with us for years. And I, if I may share another story from the book,
Yeah,
is that
please.
okay?
Yeah. I wanted to say one thing that I had a coach, Wendy Palmer. She passed away a few months ago, I think. But she said we had this practice that we would do is what would it be like? And we would be like, what would it be like? What would it feel like? What would it actually feel like to be 3% more? And we would
Yes.
choose a quality like 3% more generous or 3% more
Mhm.
patient or
Mhm.
just 3%. Because it does seem like we're going for the huge win. It's like we want it all. What's the 30-day, 60-day, 90-day
Mhm.
guaranteed abs in 6 minutes, right? It's
Yes.
but it's
Yes.
increased 3%. If you did 3% per year of self-awareness, that's awesome. But yeah,
Yes.
please share
Yes.
share the story because the stories are awesome.
It, well, this story ties into your question of that we're self-awareness isn't a one and done deal. Like, okay, I'm went through that coaching program and now I'm done. It's an ongoing process, and this story really illustrates this. So this story is about June, and June also grew up in an alcoholic family. Not all of the leaders in the book grew up in an alcoholic family, but these two women happened to. Her dad was an alcoholic, and he was very demonstrative, very angry, physically, mentally, emotionally abusive. And it wouldn't be uncommon for there to be an angry outburst and police showing up at the house at night, and the next morning, everyone pretending like nothing ever happened. And in June's words, her mom just ignored it and denied that all of this chaos was happening. June's way of dealing with all that chaos was to be the fighter in the family, and she was the only one who would stand up to her dad, and she would endure a lot of abuse as a result of it. Then fast forward as she's in a leadership position, she happens to read an article one day about adult children of alcoholics, and she was intrigued by it and went to the company's EAP department. And in the course of talking to the EAP counselor, discovered she was an alcoholic, that the way that she was coping with all of the abuse from her upbringing, the trauma, was to drink every night to the point of a blackout. And she truly was fully functional the next day. It just was her norm. She got into recovery, embraced the 12-step program, got a sponsor, was actively in therapy, working on her stuff, which again, we all have stuff.
Yeah.
Few years later, so she's sober, she's actively working on herself. She's up for a promotion. And her boss says, we want to give you this promotion. However, you have some rough edges, and we want to send you to this leadership development program to help you before we would give you this promotion. She goes to the facilitation, to the program, and he said to me, Bonnie, there are people there like me who needed to learn how to tone down, and then there were other people who needed to learn how to speak up. At one point, the facilitator asked, tell me about your upbringing. And she did. And the facilitator said, you're safe. You're okay. You got out. And that was her turnaround. That all those years after she had been actively working on herself, gaining self-awareness, was no longer using alcohol to cope with all that trauma, had developed positive coping skills. She still had some rough edges as an overly aggressive boss. And it was those words from the facilitator, who basically assured her, you're okay, you're safe, that helped her to calm down. And physiologically, she then went on to become a calm, present, emotionally intelligent, empathic leader as she continued to gain self-awareness and lift her blinders and recognize there were still wounds there that needed healing. And she's just an amazing transformation story. And again, going back to your questions about changing patterns and blind spots, it's throughout our lifetime. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with this. That's just part of being human, that we've all got stuff to work on. And the key is the willingness to grow and to be vulnerable about it and talk about it and have that culture, which I sense that you have there at your company, to say, okay, this got triggered here, and either make an apology, make a repair, and move forward from there.
And everybody's learning new stuff. And the pace of learning in our industry is so fast. And so to be able to make a mistake, like, that's the biggest thing. I want people to know, like, it's okay. Like, if you're doing your job, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, it means you're not doing anything. You start
Right.
doing something.
Yeah.
So I love it. And the stories are so powerful. I love what you said about the difference between coaching and therapy, because I think with self-awareness, there's a challenge of, you don't want to be too much living in the past. Like, there is, like, put the past in the past, but
Right.
then there is this, bring the past into the present, but then live it forward. The coaching is like, live that forward, but we have to have knowledge of the patterns. So what a great visit with you. I'm going to read your book. How did my family get in my office? Well, I know how I hired them. But this is, how did 3 generations, how did 4, like, even for me, I was going back, uh, it's, by the time my kids' kids, it's gonna be 5 or 6 generations. So, Bonnie Artman Fox, and what is the best way for people to connect with you? We're gonna put your book in the show notes. Um, what's a great way for our listeners to connect with you and
Sure.
the Boss Whisperer?
Thank you. Thank you. My website is bonnieartmanfox.com. If your listeners want to learn more about the Abrasive Leadership Coaching Program, they can go to leadershipturnaround.com. And once you put your name and email in, you will receive a resource that outlines the Abrasive Leadership, the Boss Whispering Coaching Program. And you will also receive an email that has an assessment to take that to find out if maybe you are an abrasive leader, or maybe you have an employee that you're not quite sure whether you should talk with them about their behavior. You can take this assessment with that person in mind, and it will give you a report then of what you learn, and that would be suggestions for next steps of what to do for either for yourself, if you're taking it for yourself, or for your employee. And then also I'm on LinkedIn, and the assessment is go to workplacefamilyfactor.com, and you can put again your name, your email in, and take the assessment, and that way you would get the results of how your conflict style based on your upbringing, and then you'll get a series of emails based on your conflict style to understand what you can do about it to improve your conflict style for the better.
Yeah. To show you how I want to take this assessment. I'm going to be the first to take the assessment. And we'll have a link to that website. You can remember if you wrote it down, but we'll have links in the show notes to everything you talked about. And thank you so much. I want to be the first to thank you. This was so awesome.
Thank you.
Bonnie Artman Fox, author and Boss Whisperer extraordinaire. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here with you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Tao of Pizza podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.